Welcome to TrialSite News Podcast Series. For today's episode, we have a follow-up to an interview we did with Patrick Girondi involving the small, Chicago-based biotech venture Errant Gene Therapeutics, which was engaged in a court battle against a well-funded biotech called Bluebird Bio and a venture capital firm known as Third Rock Ventures. Now, with allegations of breach of contract, tortious, business interference, and fraud, TrialSite News initiated a project to review publicly available information, including court records, to derive a more thorough understanding of the case at hand. Now, since we last covered this story, I had another opportunity to sit down with Mr. Girondi for our show, The Watchlist series, to see how things progressed since we last covered the story. And for this show today, we will be replaying that interview for you. And here is how it went. We here at TrialSite News, we want to welcome back Patrick Girondi. We spoke with him back in September about his David versus Goliath struggle with his company Errant Gene Therapeutics and its legal case versus Third Rock Ventures, Sloan Kettering, Bluebird Bio, and CEO Nick Leshley personally. So Mr. Girondi, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Oh, it's our pleasure, and we're so happy to have you back. So let's jump right into this. A lot has happened, and we know the case is proceeding this summer. What have you learned about yourself in this epic struggle?
Well, I think the first thing that I learned is that, and the most important thing, is how really limited I am. My greatest strength ends up being the love that I have for my son. And over time, I've met so many men, women, children with orphan diseases. I've traveled Tanzania, India, etc. And I've learned that they're basically all my son's brothers and sisters. And so the real strength that I have has come from meeting these people, whether they're on the south side of Chicago or the west side of Mumbai. And it's really given me some incredible insight into their lives. And it's made me, I think, a much better person.
Well, I got to tell you, from my last conversation with you, I'm not surprised. So the family man struggle then has taught us at TrialSite News a lot. We wonder if the type of line crossing, sharp dealing that you have experienced, where it goes even beyond gloves off, bare knuckle tactics to potential civil torts and perhaps even closing in on criminal conduct. Does that represent an isolated incident or a broader practice?
I look at this like I look at everything in my life. When I was a kid, my mother said that when we needed money, I would go door to door trying to sell the utensils. When I was 8 or 9, I began shining shoes. When I was 12, I bussed tables. I was 15, I washed dishes in a Northwestern hospital kitchen. I was 17, I was in the military. When I got out of the military, I drove trucks. I've seen a lot of different sides of life, and I've always tried to put myself in other people's shoes. Take a walk in their shoes, see how their life is, look at their trials and tribulations. Each night I go to bed and I before I put my head on the pillow, I ask myself, what didn't I do today I should have, what could I have done better, and what I need to do tomorrow. In the end, when we talk about the behavior, and especially gloves off, bare knuckle tactics, which has been used not only by you now, but also in court documentations, I don't think that's what I'm up against. I'm not up against gloves off, bare knuckle tactics. If we're going to call lying, treachery, and action which endangers and kills patients as gloves off, bare knuckles, then why don't we call the murdering and torturing that gang leaders and the actions of terrorists do as gloves off, bare knuckles? What I really believe that I've encountered is cowardly behavior, sneaky backdoor dealing that pads people's pockets with the blood and suffering of patients and their families. If we look at what's going on today, we look at the Sackler family. They claim there's a net worth of $13 billion, all the pain and the suffering that's been created by their industry. And it looks like maybe we'll take $3 billion and we're going to let them off. Following the American dream today seems to be trying to get filthy rich. And it seems that we're willing to give people that are trying to follow the American dream of getting filthy rich, when they get caught breaking laws, it almost seems like we're willing to give them a slap on the wrist. I mean, I have 2 personal family friends who lost sons to these antidepressants. One kid, 21 years old, or young man, 21 years old, walked on the railroad tracks in Beverly until the commuter train caught up with him. Another kid plunged a knife into his chest while his little brother tried to stop him.
Oh, wow.
I believe the American dream is about happiness and about helping others. But instead, as Michael Douglas, Gordon Gekko, and Wall Street Film said, greed is good. It seems that it's become the truth for us, and that giving the cowards who chase the greed a pass when they get caught seems to be normal. So these gloves off, bare knuckle tactics, I think, are epidemia in the industry. I think that the craziness that goes on, the unconscionable things that, for example, Sloan Kettering is indemnifying Bluebird for gross negligence and wrongful doing against EGT. I believe this is against public policy. It's unenforceable. Yet Sloan Kettering, a not-for-profit, is paying millions and millions of dollars in attorney fees for Bluebird and Nick Gleschly instead of treating patients, instead of curing disease. They claim that they had no money to buy new vector, yet they have tens of millions of dollars for Bluebird and Nick Gleschly's attorneys. I mean, Sloan Kettering gets hundreds of millions of dollars from the NIH, NCI. This is taxpayer money, and they get this hundreds of millions of dollars each year. It ends up being billions and billions of dollars of taxpayer money. And there's got to be strings attached to this money. There's got to be more control. The CEO of Sloan Kettering, he makes $6.5 million a year. He hasn't lost his job in all of these scandals, these recent scandals. Wow. It's horrifying that the same institute encourages patients to start FundMe pages to confront, ridiculous prices. And then they have the absurdities like the CEO making $30,000 a day. I mean, it's just all baffles me. I mean, his chief medical officer is caught not disclosing sponsors. His top licensor gets caught with his, hands in the cookie jar and has to give 1.4 million back. He's got board members and employees who are trying to sell patient data to set up AI profit companies. The CEO of Sloan Kettering's name's Thompson. I've met him a couple of times, and he might be a great guy. But he's been there for 10 years, and all of this has happened on his watch. I don't understand that he's still in his position. I mean, whether he's completely innocent in all of this and is just kind of lackadaisical. I mean, he doesn't belong there. I mean, it's the same thing I say about Nick Gleschly, the CEO of Bluebird. I mean, after it's surfaced and been in court documents that he's told analysts to hide information, which is pertinent to every decision that an investor makes in Bluebird Bio, how he's still the CEO. His board doesn't do anything. It tells you that the board's in his pocket. Well, if he goes to jail, then the board should go with him. I mean, but the problem is today, we talk about this kind of behavior. The corporate board members, they all have insurance to cover any legal bills and liability, and they all have get out of jail cards free. I mean, sorry to go on and on about this stuff, but it just drives me absolutely crazy. And I mean, whether Bluebird loses in courts or wins in court, they win. They took a faulty vector that created clonal dominance in 2010. They blocked their own and sabotaged their only competitor. Nick Gleschly, the CEO, has made close to $100 million in compensation since 2013. I mean, if he does 10 years in jail, that's $10 million a year. I mean, I'd do it standing on my head. It's just all just baffles me. And I was a trader at one time at the Mercantile Exchange, Chicago Board of Trade, member of New York Stock Exchange, et cetera. I watch his stock, which has come down from 230 to 70, now back to 90. All the while, the Dow Jones Pharmaceutical Index is up 20%. I can't believe that investors, aren't out there. I myself have capitalistic beliefs, but for the good of capitalism, we got to protect it from pigs like these men, or in the end, capitalism cannibalizes itself.
Right, crony capitalism has been a bane in our society for at least all my life. Now, clearly there is something broken. An industry needs trust from its stakeholders, and patients and their families are fundamental to that story. So how then can we start building trust back into the world of drug development?
People trust the court system, to kind of weed these bad seeds or bad eggs out. The problem is the court system is overloaded. So these companies spend millions and millions of dollars on expensive mouthpieces to avoid justice. I mean, my case has been going on over 5 years. We're finally getting to court in July. It'll be 5.5 years since we filed. And all the while, my competitor is trying to get his faulty product approved. It's now partially approved in Europe. When they get a big lead in things like that, that means that all of the funding dries up for other companies, whether the other companies are good or bad. You know, we're now waiting for the publishing of our 3 patients from Sicily, who are all beta zeros. And after 7 and 5 years, 2 out of 3 of these patients have a reduction in over 50% of their blood transfusions, which is incredible. They did myelosuppression, not myeloablation. They used a vector made in 2009-10, not a modern made vector. There was no titer enhancements used that they use today, etc. You know, you say, how do you get your faith back? I mean, yeah, that's a great question, because, you know, our patients in the end were all given the back seat so that Bluebird could get a clean runway, jack up the price of a drug by over $1 million. And, you know, in the end, if we want to mix it all in, it gets complex, etc. But Celgene buys Juno, and the inventor of my product, him and his wife are also the scientific founders of Juno. I know it sounds a bit complicated, and I certainly don't want to confuse anyone, but all of these things are become intertwined, and not just with my case, but with all of these cases.
So on that note then, I mean, part of the dynamic is access to drugs and pricing. And even if payers grant access, often the drugs are just too expensive. So what direction on that front do we need to take to consider how pricing can become reasonable for all? Otherwise, there are so many people that won't get helped by advancements in new therapies.
Well, you know, there's some really outstanding leaders that we need to lean on in our industry. I know some of them: Emil Kakkis of Ultragenics, John Ballantyne, Michael Chambers, Aldebaran, J. Scott Elmer of St. Jude, Andrew Wilbur, Norb White, Jeff Marazzo, Spark, Marlene Hafner, Sandy Hayhurst, Jennifer Van Houten, Ken Sussman. I mean, they're all wonderful people in this industry. And in a certain sense, we need to follow them. And these kind of people believe they did a good job, not because the price of their shares are higher necessarily, but because they're helping save patients' lives. And eventually, of course, the share price will follow that. You know, most therapies are invented in academia,
Right.
places like Memorial Sloan Kettering, the universities, Boston University, Mass, MIT, IIT, etc. And unfortunately, big pharma either takes advantage of incompetent officers or actually inserts friends like the CEO of Memorial Sloan Kettering, who are actually, in the end, you know, just other pharmaceutical officers, other executives of pharma, even though they're at the head of our non-for-profits. They're at the head of our academic institutes. And somehow, therapies that are paid for by the public taxpayer are given away to these for-profit companies. And then, to make it worse, they take this technology and then they charge the patient through the nose ridiculous, sometimes millions of dollars. I believe that the NIH and the NCI and these academic institutions have to have more control, and the government needs to have more control over all of these taxpayer investments. These white-collar criminals are the first people to call the police when they feel threatened, And they're the same ones to say that, well, oh, we need to privatize all health industry because the government is corrupt, inept, or incompetent. They're a bunch of opportunists. We really can't have things, both ways.
So let's then move towards the future. Assuming you come out ahead from this court battle, what are some of your thoughts as to how you can take what you've learned and help patients and the industry come to a better place?
Well, I'm in constant contact with people like Lucia Luzzatto, Eugene McCarthy. Um, the Orphan Drug Act needs to be revisited, and the diseases need to be regrouped into micro orphans to big orphans. You can't give a company the same carte blanche when you have a patient population of 10 as you do when you have a patient population of 1,000 or 10,000. There needs to be safety valves in the Orphan Drug Act that would allow the FDA to limit market exclusivity in case of sponsors' excessive profit from an orphan drug. And drug prices need to be justified. Lucia Luzzatto published in July 2018 in Lancet, and he called it Outrageous Prices of Orphan Drugs, a call for collaboration. We need to involve people like him in trying to come up with solutions. Professor Eugene McCarthy, who called to prosecute drug companies, fraud is organized crime, and use RICO. And he wrote this wonderful article and brought all of these great examples about how today the drug industry is actually represents in a certain sense, or is very similar to the old organizations, whether you want to call it organized crime or mafia, etc. And we've got to stop ridiculous compensation of CEOs and their boards who rubber stamp their actions, and the thousands of overpaid minions of the CEOs. We have to stop all of that money being put as drug development. That doesn't belong in drug development. The 24 million that Nick Leshley was compensated last year somehow is put into drug development, and then they whine and cry about how much drug development costs. I mean, it's just incredible.
Now, before I let you go, Patrick, can you tell us about International Museum of Surgical Science?
Yes. As we were talking about before, there are some wonderful, wonderful people in the industry.
Yes.
And the International Museum of Surgical Science in Chicago exemplifies these people. And from February 21st to April 5th, there will be a show, an exhibition. The artist's name is Megan Euchre, E-U-K-E-R. I met Megan Euchre about 3.5 years ago. I told her the story about the family who had gifted me a Versace jacket to perform for their 2 children who had died, Lane and Noah. She was very touched by this story. She actually made a statue of me in the jacket. She came to a couple of the concerts. She awarded another statue, same statue in the jacket, to Franco Locatelli, to John Tisdale, and to Michelle Settlin, who are all recipients of the Orphan Disease or Orphan Drug Award. And she's putting on an exhibition between February 21st and April 5th at the International Museum of Surgical Science, talking about this case, about this court case. And I think it takes a lot of courage on the part of the museum, a lot of, real hard decision making. And I admire Megan Euchre for her dedication to the orphan diseases as well.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely link to it so our audience can learn more about it, and maybe even those in the area can attend. So thank you so much for talking with us today, Patrick. It was great to have you back. And as always, it's an enlightening experience talking to you, and we'll certainly be keeping our readers and listeners and viewers up to date on how this story progresses. And for those of you in the audience who want to learn more, you can go to errantgene.com, and of course, we will be keeping this story posted on TrialSite News, and links will be provided in the description below. So thank you again, Patrick, for joining us.
Thank you.
The pleasure is ours.